My question is for Lawrence Krauss. You may know that some evangelical religious groups have direct access to children in Australian public schools. My research has shown that some of these organisations teach that man and dinosaurs once lived together, that the earth is only 6,000 years old, and that children will burn in hell if they don't read the Bible every day. How might teaching such things to children in state education affect Australia's future?
All right, Lawrence Krauss, that was directed to you, so we'll go to you first and then we'll hear from the rest of the panel.
Okay, well, I've recently in the United States stated that teaching creationism is child abuse, and I think it is. Namely, if you withhold knowledge or you do anything to children that puts them at a competitive disadvantage as adults, it's child abuse. It's mild forms of child abuse, but it's like withholding medicine, withholding knowledge that later on will cause kids to become less competitive because evolution is the basis of modern biology, and teaching things that are basically lies, even if they're well-intentioned, is child abuse. I mean, it's not that people are doing this to be evil, but they're hurting their children, especially, of course, telling kids they're going to go to hell. That's definitely child abuse. It is inappropriate, and teachers not only should not be doing this, but in fact, if they are, they should be removed, in my opinion, because the purpose of education, as I've often said, is not to validate ignorance, but to overcome it.
John Dixon.
Yeah. This is going to be an agree fest, I think.
Great.
I agree. But for one thing that I think lowers the tone. On the science, I totally agree. And you'll find that most mainstream Christians are very comfortable with science, and with all of the discoveries of science, including the 13.72 billion years ago there was a bang, and evolution by natural selection. This is standard. When you go to theological college, you are taught how to read Genesis 1. And it's quite clear that Genesis 1 is written in a style that is most unlike the historical prose we know from other parts of the Bible. The style is not quite poetry, but it's more in the direction of poetry. It uses number symbolism in a way that would blow your mind. The artistry of it is clear. Now, this is not Christians in the modern world scared of evolution or the findings of science and so changing what they think of the Bible. This was the view of ancient Jews like Philo of Alexandria in the 1st century, the greatest theologian of the ancient world, St. Augustine, Origen, Clement, and so on. This was a pre-scientific analysis of the text. So I think whatever science discovers and can truly demonstrate, I sign up for.
So, John, I'm going to interrupt you. What do you think is going on in these schools then? I mean, is it some radical branch of the Christian church that somehow got into these schools? What do you think is actually happening?
I think it isn't happening a lot, but it's up to the officials to go and find out how much it's happening. And I've got plenty of friends who are six-day creationists, and I'm going to get some love mail after this for sure. But look, I have great relationships with them. I just think they're wrong. Wrong on the science, wrong on the Bible. The only thing I want to pick up Lawrence with is to call it child abuse. To me, there are two problems with this. One, it so inflames the conversation. And I think the new atheism breeds of this kind of inflamed kind of conversation. The second thing I find very uncomfortable about it is that anyone in the audience who has actually been abused finds that a very odd use of that very loaded term. I know you don't mean it like that, but it's like someone saying, oh, that's a Holocaust. There's one Holocaust.
Well, I think I realize it's loaded, but I think you have to draw attention to the fact that we shouldn't support at all lying to children and in fact presenting them with things which we know are wrong and leading them down the garden path.
But look, they're going to get to university.
And we all do that as parents too at some level, but then the purpose of, if you're a parent, is to try and get kids to think for themselves, to question, And to say you shouldn't believe science because, and I think it's fear. The reason this is happening is that there are a lot of people who think that science will remove their faith. And therefore, it's better that their kids not know how the universe really works for fear that they might stop believing in God. But that's the same thing that drives the Taliban.
Okay, and they don't want kids to be educated. What you should be doing, Lawrence, what you should be doing, here's a little tactic. Yeah. Hand them over to us. People like the Centre for Public Christianity, where I work, who are trying to educate not only the general public, but also the Christian public on biblical scholarship and scientific scholarship. To call it child abuse, I just think is all wrong.
When you say hand them over to us, do you mean the people who are teaching these things should actually be handed over to you for re-education?
Yeah, well,
is that what you're saying?
Yeah. We have this little prison out the back. No, look. Okay, hang on, go. I just mean we could be the friend. We could be the friend to the new atheism and have the effect you want. I think all you're doing is firming up the opposition.
Okay, just a brief question, a brief answer. Cindy Pan.
What I was thinking when the two of you were talking, I was thinking about, what children are being taught. And maybe, if a child happens to, 1 year in their schooling, be taught by a teacher who believes in creationist theory. Fortunately, I think there are a multiplicity of truths that will be presented to children. And one of the most important thing that children and adults have to learn is that they will be presented with a multiplicity of truths, and sometimes they have to eventually use their own judgment to discern what is true and what is false. For example, there are many people who believe that the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus are real. Some people think they're not real, and some people are not sure. We're all taught at a certain point that they're real, but at a certain age, we all come to understand that maybe they're not. And there's a period where, they'll be saying, oh, so-and-so at school says they're not real, but I'm not sure. And I must say I've been through this with my kids. And I said, basically, I drew the corollary with Jesus and God. And I said, well, with God, there are people who believe he's real. There are people who believe he's not real. And there are people that are not sure. And I said, with Santa Claus, I'm not sure. What about you? And my son said, well, I think Santa's real, but I think God is not. I think, it's the same with
consistent philosophy going on in your family.
With the creationist thing, they're going to hear that story, and it's a story, and all stories have value, and sometimes it's not simply a question of is the story true or is it false. A story has value regardless of whether it's true or false. For example, we all enjoy Little Red Riding Hood, The Three Bears. There are all these stories that are eternal, that have mythical status, but they have value because there's often a moral, or they're entertaining, or for whatever.
Cindy, I hope you're not making the comparison with the God thing here, because how many adults do you know come to believe in Santa? Right?
Well, I'm just saying that
adults come to believe in God.
There are
the analogy doesn't work for me.
Whatever age who believe, there are people who don't believe, and there are people who are not sure. You believe. You don't believe, and I'm sure there are many people who are not sure.
But this isn't a question about God. This is a question, when you say all stories have value, that's fine, but the story that the Earth is 6,000 years old doesn't have any value because it's wrong.
It's a good, excellent. So I'm going to interrupt you both because we actually have
not all teachers
Cindy, so I'm going to interrupt you because there is a questioner here actually, I think does believe in creationism, and it's Tim Hubbard.